You know that feeling. You open your news feed, and it's just a lot. Like alert after alert, headline after headline, all screaming for attention.
Yeah, and often trying to push a certain button, right? Get a strong reaction.
Exactly. It feels like you're stuck in this loop sometimes, just hearing the same takes over and over,
Yeah.
maybe missing the bigger picture. If that sounds like you, well, you're not alone.
It's true. That constant stream can be, frankly, exhausting. You want to be informed, but it can feel, well, manipulative sometimes.
Right. So, welcome to our deep dive into the news from yesterday, April 9th, 2025. Think of this as your ICYMI, in case you missed it.
But with a bit of a difference.
Yeah, our goal here is to cut through some of that noise. We want to break down what actually happened, look beyond the spin, and check out the different angles.
We're pulling from a bunch of sources today, trying to get balanced perspectives, using aggregators like Ground News, AllSides, tools that actually show you different viewpoints and how biased reporting might be.
It's all about getting a clearer view, because every source, well, everyone has their own lens, right?
Exactly. We're not here to tell you what to think. Just lay out the information so you can think critically and decide for yourself.
So let's dive into April 9th, 2025. One of the first things that caught my eye was the U.S. funding for the World Food Program. Seemed like a bit of whiplash there.
That's right. It looks like the U.S. had initially cut funding over the weekend for several World Food Program operations.
Which countries were affected?
It was Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Ecuador, and Somalia. So a pretty wide range of places facing serious humanitarian needs.
Wow, yeah. That's significant. These are places where that aid is absolutely critical, isn't it?
Definitely. A sudden stop like that could really disrupt things on the ground,
Hmm.
makes planning impossible for aid groups, and hits vulnerable people hard.
But then, what happened on the 9th?
Well, the reports indicate the funding was restored on April 9th.
Just like that, a complete reversal.
Seems so.
Makes you wonder what happened behind the scenes. Did the sources give any reason for the quick flip-flop?
Not really, not in the details we saw. It just highlights how fast things can change on the international stage. You need to keep watching these stories.
Okay, another one that felt a bit like diplomatic table tennis involved South Sudan.
Ah, yes. The situation with the Congolese national deported by the U.S.
Right, so South Sudan initially refused to let him in.
Correct. And the U.S. response was pretty blunt, a blanket visa ban on all South Sudanese citizens.
Wow, okay, that's a strong move.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like the U.S. wasn't happy with South Sudan's decision at all.
Clearly not. But then, fairly quickly, on April 9th, South Sudan changed its mind.
They let the person in.
Yes, they reversed the decision, citing the spirit of friendly relations was the phrase used.
So pressure worked, it sounds like.
Mhm.
It's interesting how these sort of smaller diplomatic incidents play out. They don't always make huge headlines, but they have real effects.
And it shows how interconnected things are. One country's action triggers a reaction, which then leads to another change, fast.
Okay, moving to another international story. Some U.S. citizens jailed in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, over a coup attempt. Looks like they were released.
That's right. 3 U.S. citizens were handed over to U.S. custody on April 9th.
What led to that?
Well, it apparently followed some high-level talks between Washington and Kinshasa. The report suggests these talks covered security issues, but also, importantly, minerals.
Minerals. That's always a big factor in the DRC, isn't it? Adds another layer.
It certainly does. A lot of these diplomatic efforts happen quietly, especially when there are sensitive economic and security interests involved.
Makes you wonder about the levers being pulled behind the scenes.
The outcome, though, was the release.
Okay, and sticking with diplomacy, the U.S. and Russia are set to talk, though it sounds very specific.
Yes, delegations are scheduled to meet in Istanbul, actually on April 10th, so today as we record this.
And the topic?
The reports are very clear. The discussion will focus solely on stabilizing bilateral embassy operations.
Solely. That word jumps out. They're really trying to fence this conversation in, aren't they? Given, everything else going on between them.
Exactly. It suggests a very narrow agenda. But, just meeting at all could potentially open other channels later.
Maybe. Or maybe it's just practicalities. You need embassies to function, even when relations are terrible.
That's the core of it, probably. Maintaining those basic diplomatic channels is essential, regardless of the broader tensions. It's a baseline necessity.
Okay, now this next one. This feels potentially significant for European security. Talk of the U.S. pulling troops out of Romania and Poland.
Yeah, this is definitely one to watch. Senior Defense Department officials are reportedly considering withdrawing up to 10,000 troops.
And these were troops put there specifically because of the war in Ukraine, Right, deployed by the Biden administration.
Correct. To strengthen defenses on NATO's eastern flank bordering Ukraine.
10,000 is a lot. And didn't we hear something just a couple of days ago, like April 7th, about moving forces away from a Polish weapons hub?
Yes, General Donahue announced some repositioning from that key hub. So this potential withdrawal adds another dimension.
What's the thinking here, do we know? Is it a shift in strategy? Less commitment?
That's the big question, isn't it? It could be seen as a recalibration, maybe shifting resources, but allies might interpret it differently. Adversaries, too, potentially, raises questions about the long-term U.S. posture in Europe.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. But on the other side of the coin for Ukraine, some positive news from Belgium.
Yes, good news for Kyiv. Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever announced a new aid package on April 9th. 1 billion euros.
That's a significant amount.
It is, and he also stated an ambition to provide at least that much annually while he's in office.
Wow. Okay, that's a strong ongoing commitment. Shows the war is still very much a focus for European partners.
Absolutely. It's not just words, it's substantial financial backing.
Sticking with Ukraine, but a really unusual story this time. President Zelensky announcing the capture of Chinese soldiers.
Yeah, this one was unexpected. He announced on the 9th that Ukrainian forces captured 2 Chinese citizens who were apparently fighting for Russia.
Fighting for Russia. Chinese nationals. What does that even mean?
That's what Ukraine is trying to figure out. What's the significance? Does it say anything about Beijing's involvement, even indirectly?
Right. It certainly adds a strange wrinkle to the conflict. Shows how complex and maybe hidden some aspects of global power involvement can be.
It moves beyond just state-to-state aid. Ukraine wants to understand what this means for China's support for Russia. Definitely a developing situation.
Okay, let's shift focus to the Balkans. The EU made a strong statement about Bosnia.
Yes, this was European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas on April 9th. She stated very clearly that the EU won't tolerate threats to Bosnia's territorial integrity, its sovereignty, or its constitutional order.
And this was aimed at.
It seems directly aimed at the Bosnian Serb leader, Milorad Dodik, following some recent moves and statements from him that sounded, well, separatist.
So, underlying tension still bubbling there. The EU drawing a line in the sand.
Pretty much, highlighting their commitment to stability in the Western Balkans and pushing back against anything that might undermine it.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, an interesting clash in Israel between the Prime Minister and the High Court.
Yes, the High Court stepped in. They issued an interim order on April 9th, pausing Prime Minister Netanyahu's attempt to fire the head of the Shin Bet.
The Shin Bet, their internal intelligence agency. Why did the court intervene?
The specifics weren't fully detailed in what we saw, but it implies serious legal or procedural questions about the attempted dismissal. The government has until April 20th to sort it out or find a compromise.
Shows the checks and balances are working, I guess. The judiciary pushing back.
That's certainly how it appears, a demonstration of the court's role in overseeing government actions.
Okay, back to the U.S. A warning about Chinese intelligence targeting government employees. Feels like we hear this kind of thing periodically.
We do. The National Counterintelligence and Security Center put out an alert on the 9th, warning that Chinese intelligence agencies are actively targeting current and former U.S. government employees.
How are they doing it?
Posing as legitimate organizations, consulting firms, corporate headhunters, think tanks trying to recruit people.
It's a reminder, isn't it? The ongoing espionage threat and the need for people with sensitive knowledge to stay vigilant.
Absolutely. Shows how sophisticated these efforts can be and why counterintelligence is so crucial.
On a different, more disturbing note, a guilty plea in California related to that plot against Justice Kavanaugh.
Yes, a man pleaded guilty on April 9th to attempting to assassinate a U.S. justice. This connects back to that 2022 plot targeting Brett Kavanaugh. His trial was actually set to start pretty soon.
Chilling. A stark reminder of the dangers public figures can face, especially in such a polarized time.
It really underscores the potential for political anger to spill over into violence.
In New York City, Mayor Adams made a move regarding federal immigration authorities at Rikers Island.
Right. His administration issued an executive order on the 9th, allowing federal immigration authorities, likely ICE, to set up office space at the Rikers Island jail complex.
That seems like a move that will definitely generate some strong opinions.
Yeah.
Given all the debate around immigration and local cooperation with federal enforcement.
No doubt. It touches on sensitive issues about federal versus local roles, immigrant rights, due process. It'll be controversial.
Shifting to politics and money, Michael Bloomberg's gun control group is planning some big spending.
Yep. They announced plans to spend $10 million. The goal is to help elect Democratic attorneys general in key battleground states over the next couple of election cycles, 2025 and 2026.
State AGs.
Yeah,
They have a lot of power over how laws are actually enforced, don't they?
they really do. They interpret state laws, decide on prosecutions, file lawsuits. So targeting those races makes strategic sense if you want to influence gun policy at the state level.
Shows the fight over gun control continues intensely on multiple fronts.
Definitely. It's a major focus for advocacy groups on both sides.
Also from the Justice Department, some changes in how they're going after cryptocurrency crime.
Seems so. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche issued a directive, this was actually back on April 7th, telling prosecutors to limit their pursuit of certain kinds of crypto crimes.
Limit them, like focus resources elsewhere.
Possibly. He also announced they're disbanding the dedicated National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. It suggests a shift in strategy, maybe focusing on bigger fish, larger scale fraud, or illicit finance cases rather than smaller stuff.
Or maybe acknowledging how difficult some of these cases are to prosecute effectively. Crypto is complex.
Could be a bit of both. Law enforcement is constantly playing catch-up with the technology. This might be a recalibration based on resources and impact.
Okay, now this involves the Trump administration and some universities. Funding freezes.
Yeah, pretty significant ones. Reports indicate the administration has frozen over $1 billion for Cornell and around $790 million for Northwestern.
$1 billion for Cornell. Wow.
It's reportedly linked to investigations into their DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also allegations of anti-Semitism on campus.
That's a major financial hit. Sends a strong message from the administration about those issues in higher ed.
It certainly does, and it raises big questions about federal government influence over private universities and the potential impact on their programs and students.
Also from the Trump administration, moves to support the coal industry.
Yes, 4 executive orders signed on April 9th. The stated goal is boosting U.S. coal, using emergency authority, apparently, to let some older coal-fired power plants, ones that were scheduled to retire, keep operating.
Okay. That fit in with a long-standing policy priority for them. Good news for coal regions, I imagine, but not for environmental groups.
Precisely. It highlights that ongoing tension between supporting traditional energy and addressing climate change concerns, a continuation of that debate.
The Supreme Court weighed in on another Trump administration matter, fired employees.
Right. On April 9th, the court blocked a lower court's order. That order would have forced the administration to reinstate over 16,000 probationary employees who'd been fired.
Why did the Supreme Court block it?
On the basis of standing. They ruled that the nonprofit groups who brought the lawsuit didn't have the legal right, essentially, didn't show enough direct harm to themselves to sue.
A procedural ruling, then, about who can bring the case. But wait, wasn't there another lawsuit about the same workers?
Exactly. That's the key wrinkle. Another order from a different lawsuit requiring reinstatement for many of the same people apparently remains in effect.
So complicated. The legal battles continue on multiple tracks.
It really shows how these things can play out. One ruling doesn't necessarily end the story.
Okay, another legal case involving the administration. A judge ordered the White House to give the Associated Press its access back.
Yes, a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction on the 9th, basically telling the White House they have to let the AP back into presidential events.
And the reasoning.
Straight up First Amendment. The judge said the government can't punish news outlets based on the content of their reporting. Freedom of the press.
That feels like a pretty significant ruling for journalists.
Yeah.
Reinforces that you can't just bar reporters you don't like.
It's a fundamental principle. The government has a week to respond or appeal, so we'll see if they fight it. But the initial ruling is strong.
And the ACLU filed a lawsuit about Venezuelan migrants using a really old law.
Yeah, that was interesting. They filed suit in New York on the 9th for 2 Venezuelan migrants. They claim the government is trying to deport them using the Alien Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act. Isn't that from like the 1790s?
It is, from 1798. Very old law. The ACLU is asking for an emergency order to stop the government from moving the migrants while the case is heard. It also follows a recent Supreme Court decision about where these kinds of cases should even be filed. So, complex legal ground.
Okay, finally, let's talk economy. The markets had a wild ride because of Trump's tariff announcements.
Absolutely wild. Wednesday, April 9th, saw Wall Street do a complete 180. The Dow Jones went from being down significantly to finishing way up.
What caused the turnaround?
President Trump limited some of the tariffs he'd previously announced or hinted at. He even sort of acknowledged the market gloom earlier in the day, the markets breathes the sigh of relief, it seems.
So less severe tariffs than feared.
Yeah.
And we saw specific sectors jump.
Yeah, automakers, travel companies, big tech, retailers, their stocks surged. These are all companies that would be hit hard by broad tariffs, especially on goods from Asia and Europe. Earlier, they've been down.
Shows how sensitive markets are to trade policy news. Instant reaction.
Immediate and direct. But it wasn't all relief, was it? Retaliation was announced, too.
Right, China.
China announced it's raising retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods up to 84%, effective April 10th. That's huge.
84%. And the EU.
The EU approved its own retaliatory tariffs on about $23 billion worth of U.S. goods. Plus, you had leaders and groups from Ireland, the European Chamber, and China, all expressing serious concern about the global economic impact.
And this wasn't just stocks, right? Oil prices fell too.
They did. Fears that all these tariffs could tip the global economy towards recession hit oil demand forecasts, so prices dropped.
Even big companies like Walmart felt the uncertainty.
Yeah, Walmart kept its full-year forecast but pulled its guidance for the first quarter profit, specifically citing tariff risks. And Pakistan is apparently sending a delegation to the U.S. because they're facing 29% tariffs.
Wow. It just paints a picture of how tangled everything is.
Mm.
One country makes a move on trade, and the ripples go everywhere instantly.
It really does. Businesses, governments, markets worldwide reacting in real time. It underscores that global economic interconnectedness completely.
So looking back at just that one day, April 9th, 2025, quite a mix. What are the big takeaways for you thinking about our goal of getting past the noise?
Well, a few things really stand out. First, just the sheer speed of change. Funding cut, then restored, diplomatic positions reversed, markets swinging wildly. It tells you how important it is not to just react to the first headline. Stories evolve.
Right. Need to follow the updates.
Second, that interconnectedness we just talked about. A decision in Washington affects farmers in Iowa, manufacturers in China, stability in the Balkans. It's all linked.
Yeah, nothing happens in a vacuum.
And third, the real-world impact of decisions made at the top. Executive orders, court rulings, diplomatic talks, they aren't abstract. They affect troop deployments, aid funding, people's jobs, legal rights, everything.
It really reinforces that idea that there are so many layers beneath the surface. What catches the eye initially is often just like the tip of the iceberg. And trying to see more of what's underneath, looking at those different angles, that's what we're aiming for here.
Exactly. Giving you more context, more perspective, so you can navigate the news flow a bit more effectively, hopefully.
So maybe a final thought to leave folks with. When you see all these different reactions, the markets, other countries retaliating, the legal challenges, what does it tell you about how information itself travels and how we each interpret it through our own lens in this super connected world?
And maybe thinking about the tools that are out there now, resources like AllSides or Ground News that try to show bias and different perspectives. How could you use those or just be more aware as you look at the news tomorrow? How might you approach it differently?